From the Supreme Court showdown to how to handle ISIS, we'll talk about it all with Senator Gary Peters. And a punch in the gut. Federal corruption charges come at the same time Lansing debates DPS legislation. Today is Sunday, April 3rd, 2016, and this is Flashpoint. Hello, hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Welcome to Flashpoint. Devin's off this week. I'm Guy Gordon. Last week it appeared that the long-term solution for the debt that's dragging down Detroit public schools might finally be within reach. But now comes this indictment of 13 administrators and a lot of questions about whether the system can be entrusted with a $750 million infusion of new money for debt relief. The timing could not be worse. And yet another stumbling block in the State House, perhaps, this Detroit Education Commission, still learning about it. It would add yet another layer of bureaucracy. It's intended to ensure that any new schools open in Detroit that are currently underserved. But charter advocates say it could mean the death of school choice for at least 5 years. We'll sort out the potential deal killers. We'll talk to leading advocates for DPS and the state's charters. The Supreme Court this week saw yet another appeals court ruling affirmed because the Supremes were deadlocked 4-4. But at least one Republican senator, Mark Kirk of Illinois, has met with Obama nominee Merrick Garland. 15 others are saying they will agree to meet with him in the future. So is this Republican blockade to the nomination weakening? The feds dropped their lawsuit against Apple after finding their own way to break into an alleged terrorist cell phone without help from the iPhone maker. And a new development in this privacy versus security battle. There he is now, draft legislation circulating through Congress that would give federal judges the latitude to force Apple and others to open their devices in select cases. There are new reports ISIS is losing territory. That's good news. The U.S. and Russia planning some new coordination against them. But what about here at home? The rhetoric hotter than ever as America debates securing our nation from terrorists entering from abroad, perhaps with refugees, and also the homegrown variety. Our discussion with Senator Gary Peters about these and other issues up first on Flashpoint. The presidential race keeps getting more interesting. Also, the growing debate of privacy versus security, especially in light of a lot of new technology. Much to talk about with my first guest, Senator Gary Peters, and I've already apologized to him because we're going to be bouncing around from issues that have nothing to do with each other. There's so many things going on. But I want to first talk about connected cars. I know you are working hard to get a healthy chunk of the $4 billion available for this very important technological process that we're in. How would that benefit Michigan? And to what degree are we duplicating what we already have out at M-City, and how do we keep from doing that?
Well, it's we have to make sure that we are the center of the auto world going forward, and these are really transformative technologies that are coming on board. Certainly here in the greater Detroit area, we know how to make cars, and the two favorite things of mine, which are horsepower and torque. We're very good at that.
Yes.
But they are now becoming, as they become connected and computer power continues to grow at an exponential rate, this is probably some of the most probably most disruptive technology in the auto industry since cars were actually created. In the fact that the safety features are going to be phenomenal. In fact, it's estimated just in the next few years we may be able to eliminate 80% of all car crashes in this country.
Right, but how do we make sure that we're in the forefront? I know that this would help to transform Willow Run from something other than just an airport to also a big testing facility. How close are we to that?
I think we're very close, and Willow Run is a key part. That's something I'm working on very aggressively with a number of other folks. You mentioned M-City. University of Michigan has been an incredible leader in this space. They have M-City, which is a 35-acre test facility, but that's really not going to be a long-term position. We need to have much more expansive and national facility, and Willow Run will provide 330 acres. Every single possible type of testing can occur, and you can bring all the automakers to one place, and that's why this has to be the national center in Michigan.
And we could coexist with the airport. There's a lot of empty space out there. I was just out there 2 weeks ago and was surprised at just how much vacant land there is.
Yeah, it can coexist. In fact, there's talk to say not only autonomous vehicles on the ground, but the other area where we could be a real leader in Michigan are unmanned aerial flying vehicles, which also could be tested at Willow Run. It could be a national center for excellence of autonomy and some of the new technologies that are coming online.
Okay. I said we were going to bounce around. Let's talk about ISIS. I know recently you were at a refugee camp, and I'm sure that had to be a heartbreaking and touching experience. But at the same time, we've also seen what's happened in Brussels, what's happening in Germany because of unchecked immigration there.
how do we be a compassionate society here in America, but also a practical and prudent society? Because failure to screen these people properly could mean death to an American, and that's unacceptable.
No, it's totally unacceptable, and you have to have security number one. We've got to make sure we have as robust a screening system as possible, but I will say the refugee program that we have, it is the most difficult way to get to the United States is through the refugee program. Not only do you have to be screened by the United Nations and be certified as someone who is a legitimate refugee, then the United States picks that up and spends up to 18 months with Department of Defense, Homeland Security, with the FBI.
But it's not foolproof.
Well,
and nothing is foolproof.
Right.
But given what's at stake here, should the program be shut down, as some presidential candidates are suggesting?
No, it shouldn't be shut down. It is the most robust screening program. Actually, as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I'm concerned about other ways to get to the United States where it's not as robust. The visa waiver program, for example, where you can, if you're in a European country, you can come in. Just think of the Paris attacks. Those weren't refugees in the Paris attacks. Those were European nationals that did that. Right now, they'd be able to come into the country without screening. Those are the areas we need to focus on. If you are someone who wants to come to this country to do harm, you will probably take the path of least resistance, not the path of most resistance. And that's where we've got to look at. Where are those areas that we have gaps and focus on that.
As Senator Cruz and others have said that we need surveillance of Muslim neighborhoods or some kind of robust activity to try to root out those that are homegrown terrorists. Within your committee and elsewhere, what is a prudent course at this time, given that threat?
Well, actually, it's about engaging the Muslim American community and the Arab American community. And those of us here in the greater Detroit area know that we have a vibrant Muslim American, Arab American community. It's an integral part of who we are as a community, successful business people, professionals, proud Americans.
But as we're engaging, shouldn't we also be checking?
Well, and engaging that community to find out those individuals who may be radicalized. It's not something that can be done from the outside. Oftentimes it has to be done from the inside. And working with the community is a much more fruitful way to deal with the situation, and working with the community as a partner.
We saw this battle play out between the FBI and Apple over this iPhone belonging to one of the San Bernardino terrorists. They ended up dropping that suit. They apparently found their own way into the phone. But nevertheless, this whole battle of privacy versus security, especially as phone encryption technologies escalate and become almost unbreakable, if not completely unbreakable, 256-bit technology is virtually unbreakable. What must we do as a society to make sure that we have the ability to look at these devices and look into them, whether at the federal level on terrorism investigations or at the county level in homicides and child porn investigations, to make sure that our law enforcement isn't handcuffed?
Well, and we can't handcuff law enforcement. These are very serious issues, and we need to have that information. Certainly national security needs the information as well when you're talking about terrorist threats. But you have to find the balance. Certainly privacy has to be protected. But
so how do we strike the balance? And is that going to be something that needs to be legislated in Congress, or is it done on a case-by-case basis in the judiciary?
Well, it could be both. In fact, part of what we're looking at is creating a commission in the short run to really, because this is obviously a very complex subject, we want to dig in and create a commission that will give us some specific recommendations as to what Congress should be able to do. But certainly the court system is also equipped to do that. If you have judicial review to make sure that this is just not a wholesale invasion of people's privacy, but a carefully crafted, narrow looking into some information, I think most Americans would agree that that makes sense to have the courts involved.
But if you make it too narrow, then a lot of those homicide cases, maybe where they can't show an absolute that yes, the information we need is on that cell phone. You know, sometimes fishing expeditions still yield fish. So how do we make sure that this isn't too narrowly written? Well,
I guess to use the fish analogy, you just can't be too broad a net, but you still do need, obviously, enough of a net in order to catch the bad guys.
The Iranians earlier this week said once again that they will continue with their ballistic missile testing program. Is that, in your mind, a violation of the agreement that took effect just 60 days ago? And does it make you rethink your position on it and the wisdom of it?
Well, the wisdom of dealing with the nuclear deal, which I have serious reservations long term with it, and my reservations have always been that we have to hold the Iranian feet to the fire as we go forward. But in the short run, we do know that the enriched uranium that Iran had is now out of the country. We know they've filled a reactor that was creating plutonium to build weapons, has been filled with concrete. So we are safer today than we were before the agreement in the fact that those things aren't there.
How confident are we about that, given the fact that our inspection capability is still quite limited under this agreement?
Well, I met with the IAEA, which is the international organization responsible. I met in Vienna. I flew there before the implementation went forward to make sure that the inspection is robust. They believe that they have really unparalleled access to watch the Iranians, but we have to make sure that organization continues to have the funding. We also have to realize that that organization only provides information to policymakers. We have to then be prepared when we see violations to take action. And my concern is that, if there's a major violation, you'll have a snapback provision. But my concern are a series of small violations that by themselves aren't much, but cumulative are, and we have to be prepared to take aggressive action against the Iranians.
Well, I'm sure you would agree missile testing is not a small violation.
No, it is not.
So what should be the appropriate response?
And that's where we have our sanction regime, and we have to look at that. Missile will be out of the context of this agreement, but that doesn't mean we can't take tough action against the Iranians, whether it's ballistic missile testing or whether they continue to fund terrorist activities in various parts of the world.
And very quickly, as you talk to some of your more moderate Republican colleagues in the Senate, do you see that perhaps there is a growing movement to at least have some discussions with Merrick Garland, if not a full hearing before Senate Judiciary?
Well, I'm certainly hoping that's the case. We're seeing, as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, there are a number of Republicans that are coming on board to have a conversation. Certainly the American people, if you look at opinion polls, are overwhelmingly saying the Congress and the Senate needs to do its job. The Constitution is very clear. The Senate has to have hearings. Doesn't mean we have to vote yes or no.
But Joe Biden was pretty clear in 1992 when he said that he would not have held hearings under those circumstances either. So is it that
I'd rather quote the U.S. Constitution.
I'm sure you would.
The U.S. Constitution is very clear. And he also had...
No, the Constitution isn't very clear. It says the president shall appoint. It doesn't say shall as it relates to the Senate.
Well, it's advice and consent. We shall provide advice.
With advice
so it doesn't mean we have to vote yes or no, but you have to have the hearings, and then you have an election, or you have a vote rather, and folks can vote yes or no. Doesn't mean you have to agree with the president. Folks are free to vote no. But you have a candidate here who has incredible legal credentials. Everybody has agreed on that. He has already had very strong bipartisan support. When he was appointed to the Court of Appeals, I think he had 73 votes. That doesn't happen very often in the United States Senate. So he is the type of justice that we need. But more importantly, the court simply can't function when you have 8 members. In fact, one of the most eloquent people to talk about that was Ronald Reagan, who said that we need to move forward. You can't have a court with fewer than the 9, and he got an appointment during a presidential election year because it was so important. So Ronald Reagan spoke very eloquently about it.
If you want to choose any more Reagan quotes to share with us on tax reform, anything like that, income tax cuts, you want to share those now? not today?
Anytime. We can talk about it. That's fine.
Senator Peters, thanks so much. You managed to cover everything.
Yeah, we did a lot. It's great to be with you as always.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
Up next, inside the debate over Detroit Public Schools legislation, and including this Detroit Education Commission. Why do we need it? Why do we need another layer of bureaucracy? We'll explain coming up. Well, this week brought devastating news for the Detroit public school system. 13 administrators charged with stealing from the district, a huge corruption scandal. And all of this with DPS debt rescue legislation pending in the State House, where it already faced an uncertain future. So the timing could not be worse. And joining me to talk about this, but also to talk about the future of charter schools under this new Detroit Education Commission, is the CEO of Excellent Schools Detroit, Dan Varner, and the head of the Michigan Association of Public School Academies, the state-leading charter academy group, Dan Quisenberry. So as if these issues aren't complicated enough, both our guests are named Dan. So we'll try to sort that out. First, let's talk about what happened earlier this week, Dan Varner, and that is this corruption scandal. How much more difficult will this make passage of the rescue legislation up in Lansing?
Well, that remains to be seen. We'll get busy with that conversation again in Lansing when the legislature returns from its spring recess in about 10 days. It certainly doesn't make it any easier. That having been said, I think that the U.S. Attorney, in announcing the charges, said it right, which is And this is not about DPS. This is about 14, nor is it about emergency managers. She said this is really about 14 people who engage in criminal conduct. And of course, you know, we have criminal conduct, reprehensible criminal, unethical conduct that surrounds us, and DPS, any other school district, is not immune from it.
Well, this is also the third corruption investigation and indictment, I think, in the past 5 years, which would indicate that the watchdogs are watching. We just need them perhaps to be a little bit more aggressive. You spent a lot of time in Lansing, and you've also were party to some of the negotiations regarding this package of bills. How difficult do you see the sledding in the House?
I'd turn it a different way, Guy. It's important to get this right. This is a moment in time for us in Michigan and Detroit to get education right. So it will make it more difficult, but in some ways it points to some things that are necessary. Let me point to what I mean by that. 3 critical things I try to keep in mind here and keep reminding people. This is about improving academic outcome for kids in Detroit. This is about fixing, you know, the challenges that have been part of Detroit for too many years and too long. And third, and what I'm referring to here, is getting it right into the future so that 5 years from now we're not back here doing the same kinds of things.
No question.
So unfortunate that these things came up. It'll make it difficult, but there are people in Lansing trying to wrestle with these to answer that last question. Let's avoid these problems so we're not back here at the table renegotiating once more.
Earlier this week, we saw Enroll Detroit come out. This is kind of a common app, if you will, I guess, for an application process to make things simpler for Detroit parents. Give us a quick look, Dan Varner, because this is your baby, about what it will do, but also why hasn't DPS signed out of this? Right now you're representing 100 schools out of the 230.
Yeah, so really excited about this, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about it briefly. Enroll Detroit is this opportunity for families who've had trouble navigating this myriad of enrollment windows and forms and so on in the Detroit education landscape to go to a education center. We've got 6 of them set up around the city, or go to the website at enrolldetroit.org and fill out a single form, rank order the schools they're interested in. That information gets sent and shared with those schools, and then they get matched with open seats at those schools so that they're actually, it's just a much simpler process for parents who are trying to enroll in the school of their choice. I really can't speak to why DPS chose not to participate. You know,
they could sign on at a later date, could they not?
Absolutely. We're still in conversations with them and with others, and we would welcome the participation of every school.
Well, because they need enrollment. If there's anything they need, and so you would think they would embrace something that would make enrollment easier. Dan, I know that you were originally kind of a party to this, the evolution of this. Do you still wholeheartedly endorse it, or do you have some reservations?
There are 2 pieces of it. The need and the necessity of the systems that are there are very interesting, and it ought to be part of a discussion about how do we fix things for education in Detroit. Where we think there's pause in the charter sector is, well, who's going to govern this? And who makes important decisions about how that system goes forward? It's a very, very important thing. So I think you're seeing some pause in our world because people want to know, wait a second, I want to participate in solutions, but I want to know who's really going to call the shots.
Well, let's talk about the other, perhaps, big obstacle to this getting passed in the State House, and that's this creation called the Detroit Education Commission. Mayor Duggan was insistent that there has to be some kind of a mechanism to at least regulate future school growth, whether it be DPS or charter. He voiced when he, and I think you were there as well as I was, Dan, when he spoke before the Senate Government Ops Committee and said, look, I am a charter fan, I'm a school choice fan, and I want that to move forward, but we can't have unfettered growth at the expense of DPS, where high-performing DPS schools are already in place geographically. So this Detroit Education Commission, is it, the way it's currently framed, is it acceptable to the charter community? I know you had some input on it.
In the Senate package, it is not, and there's a variety of things that concern us. One is just how that's governed. We believe in an open system. That's what you've had in the city of Detroit for the last 20 years, and it has brought solutions. You don't have a charter sector here calling for bankruptcy or financial bailouts. You don't have, even if there's corruption, and it can happen.
No, but we have some that are certainly underperforming.
Absolutely, but
and we need a way to root those out and get higher performing operators in.
If you look closely at the data, they're performing successfully in some interesting ways we ought to build on. So my point is, you don't want to hurt what's working in the city, you want to build on it. And we're concerned that this becomes a closed system, a politically appointed closed system that undermines the success that we see for the potential in the next few years.
Okay, but we should show that this is, while a politically appointed system appointed by the mayor, you're going to have 3 representatives from the charter school sector, you're going to have 3 from the DPS sector, and then 1 in the middle is going to be a public education reform and accountability specialist, supposedly. So it's not that the charter people aren't represented here.
But all appointed by the mayor. And whether that was appointed by the mayor or the governor, our concern would still be, it's, as you said in the introductory comments, another layer interjected in between local government, where we have charters that have local boards, and the state, or an authorizer that represents the greater public good.
Dan, the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children and other groups have said, not necessarily Dan, but that other charter school advocates have totally misrepresented this issue and are basically fear-mongering. Do you agree?
I do agree with that, quite honestly, Guy. There's just no basis in fact for the notion that this entity would be biased against charter schools. The mayor has said publicly and repeatedly that he is supportive of good schools, whether they are traditional schools or charter schools, one. So you'd have to assume that that 7th appointment somehow would be somebody that the mayor would put in place who would be opposed to charter schools. Second, there's provision in the law that allows for high-performing charter schools that get an A or a B grade to replicate, and the DEC could do nothing to stop that replication. So that's the second thing. Third thing, Mr. Quisenberry is very fond of referring to a survey that they've done of Detroit voters, and that survey makes it really clear that Detroit voters overwhelmingly would oppose a mayor and would punish a mayor through electoral politics, through elections, through voting, who actually did things like game the system for charter schools.
We have to take a short break.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
We'll be back with more on the Detroit Education Commission right after this. Welcome back. Wrapping up our discussion here. There is 25 pages in this legislation that talks about accountability, setting standards for rewarding high-performing charters and DPS schools, and trying to weed out those that aren't performing high. Is this going to be taken statewide, and will it govern districts, suburban, outstate, rural?
That's the appropriate way to do that. I think that's something Dan Varner and I would agree on.
Can we agree on a standard?
It's a very difficult thing to do because accountability is controversial, but that's a state function, is defining that. It comes from the Constitution establishing a public school. So it is what drives schools' behavior, is state. So that's why we are concerned about a second or an additional layer in Detroit, even though we like some of the way it's defined.
Okay.
And so the accountability system that we put in place with this legislation, if the state actually did adopt one statewide, the local one would go away. It would be replaced by the statewide one.
Is it a good starting point for the statewide?
It's a great starting point. I think we would agree. I mean, it's not perfect. These are really hard things to figure out, but it is really a very solid starting point.
Confusing for the city of Detroit. At a time we're trying to say we're clearing up confusion, this will create additional confusion. We would rather take on this political challenge because this is politically oriented. Let's just get the state one done.
Let's not continue confusing the issue, though, with heated rhetoric that doesn't stay on point, and we thank you for helping to clarify some of that today on Flashpoint.
Happy to do so.
Dan Quisenberry, Dan Varner, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us for Flashpoint. Meet the Press is next, followed by Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Devin will be back next week. Have a great day.